September 10th at 5:30. We're repeating the tour that we did earlier this summer, so if you missed it, it's down by the riverside. You can park up by the office and walk down toward the Hoxie Middleton Hall. It's on the north end of the cemetery, down by the riverside. We'll catch up with you there. Free to members, $5 for non-members. And it's a nice night. If it's cool and sunny, it'll be very pleasant there. Today we're going to be learning about Gettysburg and G.S. Greene. We're very fortunate that Tom Foley is one of our local experts on Gettysburg, and he and the museum have had this wonderful give and take relationship that we share knowledge back and forth, and together we learn more than either one of us alone. So I welcome him, and I turn it over to you, Tom.
All right, thank you very much. So I'm Tom, and I'm very excited to share some of my geeky exploits with you today. So I'm going to jump right into this. This is about an hour-long program, so we'll get right to it. So I've got three goals for us today. We're going to talk about the battle for Culvers Hill, July 2nd and 3rd, 1863. We're going to talk about the monuments that were made by the Smith Granite Company, or some of the monuments. Actually, only a couple of monuments made by the Smith Granite Company. That would be a long program. And then we'll talk about George Sears Greene, who was a brigade commander at Gettysburg. So jumping right in here, the defense of Culvers Hill at the Battle of Gettysburg, and just to kind of set that up, in the spring of 1863, Robert E. Lee, general of the Army of Northern Virginia, and the other Confederate higher-ups are kind of in a bind, even though they've had a string of victories over Union armies. The Union blockade is starting to take effect, and the Confederacy is in real trouble. Vicksburg is about to fall. General Robert E. Lee hatches this plan. They're going to march the army north and try and win a victory somewhere north of Washington, D.C. Lee crosses into Pennsylvania on June 15th. Their opponents in the battle will be the unlucky Army of the Potomac under a brand new commander, Major General George Gordon Meade. The good guys in blue here are about 90,000 strong at the Battle of Gettysburg. The bad guys in red are about 70,000 strong. So these two armies meet at a town in southern Pennsylvania called Gettysburg on the Maryland border. As so many times before, the first day at Gettysburg is another victory for the Army of Northern Virginia and the Confederates. Union troops and two Union corps hold the roads and ridges north and west of town for hours, but due to Confederate reinforcements, they're pushed at the end of the day. They're forced to fall back through the town of Gettysburg to the heights south of the town. This hill here has a big cemetery on top of it, and it's called Cemetery Hill. And the unoccupied hill to its east is called Culvers Hill, which we're going to talk about today. It's one of the mysteries of the battle is why at the end of July 1st, the Confederates don't make a move to occupy Culvers Hill at Gettysburg. And that's a point argued to this day. But the Confederate attack grinds to a halt on the evening of July 1st. Overnight, the Army of the Potomac is reinforced by the 3rd Corps, 12th Corps, and 2nd Corps. And about 6 a.m. on July 2nd, the 12th Corps, which was along the Baltimore Pike over to Little Round Top there, is going to be positioned on Culvers Hill, tying into the 1st Corps troops on the summit of Culvers Hill there to the north. The 12th Corps is about 10,000 men strong. And Greene's brigade, we're going to talk about today, is part of Geary's division, which is about 4,400 men strong. Greene's brigade itself is about 1,400 troops. So you have a corps at 10,000, a division at 4,400, and a brigade below that is about 1,400 guys. The commander of this brigade is 62-year-old George Sears Greene. Greene is born in Apponaug, Rhode Island on May 16th, 1801. And he's a distant cousin of General Nathaniel Greene of Revolutionary War fame. who is also a Rhode Islander, as we know. Greene attended the West Point, graduated second in his class of 1823. Greene is married in 1828 to his West Point roommate's sister, Elizabeth Vinton, and they have 3 children. But by 1833, his wife and 3 children, by way of disease or tragedy, have passed away. So at 32 years old, he's lost his entire family. He remarried in 1838 and had 5 children. His son, Charles Thurston Greene, actually is on his staff at Gettysburg, and his youngest son, Francis Vinton Greene, who is 13 years old, is on campaign with his father, but is left behind in Maryland when it looks like there's going to be a battle sometime in the near future. George Sears Greene spent most of his life as a civil engineer, and he built railroads and viaducts and things like that all over the country. In 1861, at 60 years old, he's commissioned colonel of the 60th New York Infantry at the start of the war. He's 60, so the men kind of give him the name Old Man Greene or Pap Greene. So, but he's quickly promoted for his actions at the Battle of Antietam to brigadier general, and eventually given command of the New York Brigade. It's his old regiment's brigade. That's the 60th, 78th, 102nd, 137th, and 149th New York regiments. In July 1863, at the Battle of Gettysburg, he's just celebrated his 62nd birthday, and he's the oldest Union general at the Battle of Gettysburg. Greene's brigade arrives on Culvers Hill, and as I said, takes up a line stretching from the summit where the First Corps has already deployed and stretches all the way down the hill to McAllister's Mill Pond. That's the extreme right flank of the Union Army. Here's a kind of a zoom in of Greene's position. So when Greene arrives on Culvers Hill, this is kind of still argued by historians, but most people agree that when Greene arrives on the hill, the First Corps troops have already started to entrench themselves on Culvers Hill. This is a view taken shortly after the battle of the First Corps line, looking east from Stevens Knoll. So this is the summit of Culvers Hill we're looking at. And again, shortly after the battle, these are trenches of the First Corps troops. This is facing north from the summit itself. We're pretty sure there were trenches there when Greene arrived, but you know, to what extent, we don't really know. In any event, when Greene gets there, he has a conversation with his division commander, right? This is John Geary. And Greene says, you know, we really should fortify this position. Geary doesn't like this idea because he thinks having men fight from breastworks will make them unfit to fight without them. In other words, fighting behind fortifications is going to turn these guys into cowards. So, you know, Greene insists, and ultimately he's going to win the fight with his superior officer to fortify his line. Now, Greene, the engineer, creates what most people agree are the most formidable breastworks at Gettysburg. These troops are going to use everything at their disposal to build this line of works across the hill. We've got rocks, cordwood, you know, felled trees, and we even have this log that runs across the top, which is called the headlog, allowing you to fire underneath the log and protecting the top of your head. And the casualty reports from the battle reflect that these guys were very well protected. We have a lot of head and neck wounds, but not too much else. By the way, this rock here, this is the famous photographer Matthew Brady and his assistant. This picture was taken a couple of days after the battle. This rock is still here. So any nerds in the audience, you can go and sit on that rock, just like Brady and his assistant. And so here's Greene's line. The rest of the 12th Corps will dig in and create breastworks to some extent, but nowhere near as formidable as Greene's lines on Culvers Hill. Case in point is this traverse here created. A traverse is a perpendicular fortification from the main line that in this instance is going to protect Spangler's Lane, which is this road coming in that's a line of supply. It also, you know, gives you added protection in case you have a breach in the line and gives you a fallback position, you know, to defend from. By noon, they're all done building the fortifications, so they've been working from 6 a.m. to noon, 6 hours building these things. So day 2 of the Battle of Gettysburg in 30 seconds or less. Lee's plan is to have a rolling attack all along the Union line, starting with Longstreet's Corps about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The idea here is, if you have one attack at a time, somewhere in the Union position, you're going to open up a hole in the line that you can then exploit, right? And it works. When A.P. Hill launches his attack, there's a big hole in the center of the line. Meade has to take reinforcements, basically the whole 12th Corps, 10,000 men, from Culvers Hill and shoot them to the center to kind of shore up that line. The third part of the attack, Ewell's Corps, launches their assault on Culvers Hill basically right after Meade has just taken the whole 12th Corps off the hill. Now, the only brigade left on the hill of the 12th Corps is Greene's brigade. And there are some reports that he disobeyed direct orders. That doesn't really sound right to me, but certainly, leaving Greene's brigade was a good call, leaving Greene up on the hill. In any event, these guys, these 1,400 men, are left alone on that end of the line to hang on to Culvers Hill in the face of a force 4 times its size. So Greene's brigade starts to stretch out after the 12th Corps leaves. They get down to about here, the 137th New York, just as Johnson's division launches this big attack against Culvers Hill. It's about 9 p.m., so it's dark. Nobody can see anything. As I said, they're outnumbered 4-1, and it seems like at points that the Confederates are starting to surround them. Stewart's brigade crosses the trenches and actually kind of reverses the works here and uses the Union breastworks to fire into Greene's men. This is a big problem. Right here, we have the Baltimore Pike, which is the Union main supply line. If the Confederates are able to capture the Baltimore Pike, this spells really bad news for the Union forces. So this is a big problem. Let me just stress that. Like I said, the 137th New York, which is down here, Stewart's brigade attacks. The 137th has to fall back behind the traverse and try and hang on to the hill. Eventually, we get reinforcements for Greene's brigade from the 1st and 11th Corps, and they come to the rescue. And eventually, as the night goes on, the 12th Corps troops come back to try and take up their old line and realize there are rebels in the trenches. So the third day at Gettysburg on Culvers Hill is really about the Union troops trying to reoccupy these breastworks and the Confederate troops trying to press the advantage they've gained the night before. The Union troops launch a counterattack at about 3 a.m., and that kicks off the longest sustained fighting at the Battle of Gettysburg. 7 hours, these guys are going to slug it out on Culvers Hill from 3 a.m. to 10 a.m. And just to give you an idea, at dawn, the Confederates can get a pretty good look at the fortress of Culvers Hill that they're trying to assault here. Just to give you an idea of how intense this fight on Culvers Hill was, the 149th New York, pictured here in a panel on their monument on Culvers Hill, counted 80 bullet holes in their flag, and their flagstaff was shot in half twice, right? Pictured here is Color Sergeant William Lilly splicing the flagstaff back together. And I believe you can still see that flagstaff at the Onondaga Historical Society in New York. Also, here we have kind of a moment of serendipity on Culvers Hill, the Battle of Culvers Hill. You can see Shaler's brigade from the 6th Corps coming to support Greene's men. One of the regiments in Shaler's brigade is the 122nd New York, also called the 3rd Onondaga Regiment, because it's the 3rd regiment raised in Onondaga County, New York. All right, the 149th of Greene's brigade, which is right here, is called the 4th Onondaga Regiment, okay? And, during the battle, all of a sudden, the 122nd finds itself in the breastworks on Culvers Hill, right next to the 149th. So they see their friends and neighbors, and they raise this big cheer that apparently, quote, even drowned out the din of battle. So after 7 hours of fighting, in a huge oversimplification of the Battle of Culvers Hill, the Confederates kind of realized, the futility of the situation of trying to capture Culvers Hill, and they fall back and form a line on the west side of Rock Creek. So that's basically it for Culvers Hill at Gettysburg. Those of you who know the battle know Gettysburg ends with this big Confederate charge called Pickett's Charge on the third day that is just utterly repulsed by Union troops. And it's a huge Union victory on Northern soil and a big loss for the Army of Northern Virginia. So that does it for Gettysburg. Let's talk about monuments erected on the field. So I thought, this is covered, of course, in Built in Stone and on the Babcock Smith House website, but I thought we'd take a moment to look at the actual process of, ordering, buying, purchasing, erecting a monument. The golden age of memorialization at Gettysburg is the 1880s and 1890s, especially after state governments start funding the erection of these monuments. For instance, in 1886, New York State appropriated about $1,500 per unit that wanted to erect a monument at Gettysburg. That's about $40,000 in 2020 money. So that's a chunk of change. And it also established an organization to oversee the funding of this called the New York Monuments Commission. So let's take a look. Step one, the veterans meet with an agent from a monument company and come up with a design for the monument, all right? The plan is then submitted to the state's Monument Commission for approval, and an appropriate spot for the monument is located on the Gettysburg battlefield. All that remains of the New York Monuments Commission is in the state archives in Albany, and it's deeds to these tiny chunks of property and these maps that show the layout of where the monuments are actually going. So the Monument Commission turns around and submits the order to the Smith Granite Company. And it's at this point that the order is copied into the order book. All right, this is the 140th New York on Little Round Top. So building a monument, again, an oversimplification. If you have a statue on top of your monument, that starts with the sculptor who makes a clay model, which is turned into a plaster model, which is, probably more able to withstand some things in the workshop, I would think. That's turned over to the statue cutter, who actually takes and creates the monument in stone. So bases, tiers, flank markers, and such are produced by other Smith Granite craftsmen. Actually erecting the monument, the stones are shipped to Gettysburg by rail. The foundations are laid in some cases by Gettysburg companies, but I'm not sure if that's true in all cases. The monument is erected by a setter and a crew on site, and the monument is dedicated and turned over to the Gettysburg Battle Memorial Association early on for stewardship. But it all starts, that whole process starts with the agent, right? So I thought we'd take a moment and look at William Bud Van Amringe. Most of the monuments we're about to talk about were ordered by Civil War veterans organizations through Smith Granite Company agent William Bud Van Amringe. He's one of the most prolific salesmen of the Smith Granite Company. One article claims from the Gettysburg newspaper he had a hand in 168 different monuments at Gettysburg. Van Amringe is born in Providence, Rhode Island in 1850 and spent most of his life selling one thing or another. In 1883, he moved from Providence to Boston and began working for the Smith Granite Company office at 3 Bromfield Street, which is close to the Common. William's Uncle John is pretty famous. Columbia University has awarded the John Howard Van Amringe Mathematical Prize every year since he retired in 1910. He was the first dean of Columbia College and was the first president of the American Mathematical Society, which actually has a song that they sing in his honor at every meeting, which is kind of neat. So back to William. At some point, he purchased the Smith Granite office in Boston and started his own business, the Van Amringe Granite Works, which incorporated in 1899. And it promoted itself as also representing the Smith Granite Company, but it's unclear when the two became separate entities. This is the 40th New York monument west of Little Round Top, which was made by Smith but Van Amringe used the monument in his ads. So, there's some confusion there. Speaking of confusion, Van Amringe was a very adept salesman, and he was also an expert on the Battle of Gettysburg. There's a 1909 article here that claims Van Amringe was more familiar with the Battle of Gettysburg than any man in the country, which is a pretty big claim. And he was practically Gettysburg royalty at the turn of the century. He was an orator and an honored guest at many monument dedications. So, obviously Van Amringe is an impressive guy, but there's some general confusion in these old newspapers about some of his accomplishments. And he's given these, grandiose accolades all over the place. Things like, made the most monuments on the Gettysburg battlefield, or designed all of the monuments at Gettysburg, or, things like this, where it says, he built the first monument on the battlefield of Gettysburg. So I thought, we'd take a moment and kind of set the record straight here. Van Amringe sold the monument dedicated to the 1st Massachusetts Infantry Regiment. In other words, the regiment from Massachusetts with the numerical designation 1, as in the number, not the word first, okay? He did not design and sell, as some articles claim, the first monument at Gettysburg. That distinction belongs to the 1st Minnesota Infantry. Nor did he design and sell the first monument dedicated to a Massachusetts unit. That distinction belongs to the 2nd Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, which also happens to be the first regimental marker placed on the battlefield. Nor did he design and sell the 2nd monument to the 1st Massachusetts Infantry. He did sell the Smith Granite Company's first monument made for a Massachusetts unit, which was the 1st Mass Battery. But the 1st Mass Infantry monument was the 10th monument Smith sold to a Massachusetts unit. So, to sum up, he sold the 1st Mass Infantry's first, but not their 2nd, and not the 1st at Gettysburg, which is the 1st Minnesota, nor the 1st on the field, which is the 2nd Massachusetts. He did sell Smith's 1st Mass Monument, which is the 1st Mass Battery, not the 1st Mass Infantry, which was Smith's 10th, which he also sold. So I'm not entirely sure why these newspapers get everything screwed up. So moving on to monuments. So the 28th Pennsylvania, we're going to talk about 2 others, Knapp's Independent Battery E Pennsylvania Artillery, and the 147th New York Monument, or 147th Pennsylvania Monument. All 3 of those monuments came, the orders for which came in 1885 together. So they're all kind of confused in the order books about what was ordered when and placed where when. But in the 28th Pennsylvania is this guy, John Page Nicholson, who's a lieutenant at Gettysburg, and he winds up becoming the chairman of the Gettysburg National Park Commission in 1893, which is a position that he held for 29 years until his death in 1922. So the monument to the 28th Pennsylvania is here. This is dedicated in 1885, and this is an original view of it right after it was placed. The ceremony for the dedication wasn't actually at the monument, interestingly, because the weather was bad. So that's neat. Here's a shot of the order book photo, and we can see on top, this is a forage cap that was the original top of the monument. And here it is off to the left-hand side. I love this picture, taken somewhere maybe spring of 1886, because it shows what Culvers Hill looked like before the Park Road went in and all that stuff. It's just a really cool shot. And this is a high res photo, so you can zoom way in. This is a modern view of that. And you can see that it looks like they had to move the monument right way over there, away from the trenches, away from the breastworks when they put Slocum Ave in. And another thing which is really interesting is the original monument is on this big boulder here, but the current monument sits on a granite base. And right now, I'm not entirely sure where that base came from. I don't think it's in the order book. And if it is, I missed it. So this is a great shot from the 1930s, the CCC rerouting Slocum Ave. Originally, Slocum Ave went to the east of Culvers Hill, and it now goes to the west. And we can barely make out on the left-hand side, there's the 28th Pennsylvania monument over there. So this might have been the point where they moved that monument away from the breastworks. This is a modern shot of the monument, and we can see now the forage cap has been moved down to the second base here on the monument. In 1889, the 28th added this big star on top of the monument, which is the Corps insignia. The star is the symbol of the 12th Corps. The 28th Pennsylvania liked this design so much that they ordered an exact copy for the Chattanooga battlefield. And who was the sales agent on all of those? That's right. So up next, we have the Knapp's Battery, or Battery E, Independent Pennsylvania Artillery. This is part of the 12th Corps Artillery Brigade, dedicated in October of 1885. Now, these guys originally are part of the 12th Corps, and they've got 3 guns up on the summit of Culvers Hill, battling it out with Confederate guns on Benner's Hill. Well, when the 12th Corps is called away by Meade, they're moved down to Powers Hill. So they wind up with 2 monuments. We've got one on the summit of Culvers Hill and one on Powers Hill. This is a picture of the battery shortly after the Battle of Antietam in 1862. We've only got 3 guns out of 6 in the photo, but the battery has an interesting backstory. In July of 1861, Joseph Knapp was the first lieutenant of the 28th Pennsylvania Regiment, and the regiment itself had 18 full companies. Usually, you only have 10 in a Civil War regiment. So these guys are 800 guys, in surplus in their regiment. So Knapp had the idea to raise this artillery company, and he used some of the surplus guys in the 28th Pennsylvania to fill out the ranks in the artillery company. That unit became Battery E, Pennsylvania Artillery, and after it was trained and equipped, went under John Geary's command. And John, remember, is the division commander at Colts Hill. Knapp's Battery is commanded at Gettysburg by a guy named Captain Charles Atwell, seen here. Knapp had resigned after Chancellorsville to go run a foundry. Atwell would die a couple of months later at the Battle of Wauhatchie Junction, Tennessee, as would Geary's son, Edward, who commanded a section in Knapp's Battery. Both died at Wauhatchie, Battle of Wauhatchie. And remember that name because we're going to talk about it a little bit later. The monument on Culvers Hill to Knapp's Battery was ordered in August 1885, along with, like I said, the 28th Pennsylvania, the 147th Pennsylvania. And it was dedicated on October 13th, 1885. And yes, Ryan, before you ask, that was only a couple of weeks before Marty and Doc reunited in Hill Valley. Knapp's Battery also has a second monument on Powers Hill, seen here. It was also dedicated in 1889. Now, the guy, here's the order book for the Powers Hill monument. And actually, if we zoom down here, we see this little stubby guy at the bottom. That turns out to be the base for the original monument on the summit of Culvers Hill, right? Before it didn't have the base. So here it is in the order book. And the bronze panel that was supposed to be on it has disappeared. Nobody's entirely sure when it went missing or who took it. So we're going to have to, stay tuned on that one. This monument is pretty unlucky. The cannonball on top keeps getting stolen. All right. Have no fear. It's back at the present moment. The National Park Service says they superglued it and it's not going anywhere. We don't know. But you'll notice that the cannonball on top is an entirely different color than the rest of the monument. The reason being, it's berry granite. Boo! Yeah, exactly. So the guy that set up all these monuments in 1889 was a guy named James Roche. And he's listed in the Westerly directories as a professional monument setter. It turns out that it seems like he's the go-to guy to send down to Gettysburg to set up monuments. He's born in Calyerton, New York in 1851, dies in Westerly, and I think he's buried in Riverbend, if I'm not mistaken. Lived at 9 George Street, which is between School and Cross, I think. And he shows up in Gettysburg newspapers. He's kind of a celebrity in Gettysburg newspapers. You read it, and they'd say, "Oh, Roche is here again, setting up another monument," and they never spelled his name right, but this is the same guy. Just case in point, August 1890, he sets up the 1st, 2nd, 5th, 6th, 11th, 12th, 13th Pennsylvania Reserve monuments and Ricketts Battery. So that's 13 monuments in the summer of 1890. And he shows up in these newspapers. I've been able to find him in 1886, 1887, 89, 90, and 92. But he is conspicuously absent in 1888, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Roche was in Gettysburg in the spring of 1886, setting up the first Massachusetts monument, and these shots are Tipton photos of the first mass arriving in Gettysburg. And actually, the next photo, you can't read it here, but this says Smith Granite Company, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Yeah, pretty cool. And I'm hoping Roche is this guy with the gold watch chain, because how cool is that guy, right? And then, of course, we had this photo, and Linda, this was the one I was talking about earlier, of the first mass actually being erected. So these are really cool photos.
Where'd you get those?
These are from Tim Smith's book about Will Tipton, the photographer, but they have copies of them. Yeah, I've seen them at Gettysburg in the archives of the park. So yeah, very cool. We'll talk after. So back to the monuments. The last one from that little group of 3 is the 147th Pennsylvania, same brigade as the 28th Pennsylvania in John Geary's division. Right, this is part of the crew that got pulled off Culvers Hill to go reinforce the rest of the line. 147th ordered not 1, not 2, but 3 star-shaped monuments from the Smith Granite Company. Here's an 1897 view of the monument. Picture of the order book page. Looks like a good match to me. We're always trying to figure out if it's in a different configuration than the original order. This is the right flank marker. The unit was commanded by Colonel Ario Pardee, and the monument is placed on what's now called Pardee Field at Colts Hill. The 3rd out of 3 is their position marker for the night of July 1st. These guys were stationed on Little Round Top, and this is the intersection of Sykes Ave and Wheatfield Road. So, all right, moving on. The 123rd New York, which is a gorgeous monument. These guys are in McDougall's brigade of the 12th Corps, also part of the crew that got pulled off to go reinforce other parts of the line. So this doesn't look like their monument. These guys are too old to be the original monument dedication in 1888. So this is probably, I don't know, 1900 or so. The veterans gathered at their monument. It was originally dedicated September of 1888, and it depicts Clio, the Greek muse of history, recording the deeds of the men at Gettysburg. We only have one other Clio at Gettysburg, and she's on the Soldiers' National Monument, which was created by the Smith Granite Company. However, the statues, I believe, were cut elsewhere, cut in Italy, right? And then placed on the monument. Marble. Yep, exactly right. But the granite is all Smith Granite, as far as
New England Granite.
it is, okay. So here's a picture of the order book page. Whoop, And I think Brenda Linton pointed this out to me, but this is from Built in Stone, the Babcock Smith House Built in Stone, and it's a picture of the 1895 Labor Day Parade. Here's the Smith Granite float, and on the front of the float looks like the plaster model made for the 123rd New York. Now, whether or not that's just the same design or whether that's actually the model that they used, we don't particularly know. And Brenda said last time that this photo came from Ike, correct? And I would love to get a high-res copy of this because it looks like we've got other models inside the float, and I would love to figure out what those are. Here's another view, 1895 Labor Day Parade, and the front of the float zoomed in. It's kind of blurry, but there's really, I think we got a match there, right? This is a photo from New York at Gettysburg. It's probably about right about 1900, the view of that monument. The stone cutter, the guy that actually created the statue out of stone, is a guy named Joseph Bedford. And from what I can figure out, he was born in Ireland in Black 1847, Black 47, died in Westerly in 1900, arrived in the United States in 1855, and he's in Westerly by 1860. Served a 1-year enlistment in the U.S. Navy. He enlisted at 16, and he served aboard a captured British blockade runner, which was originally called the Victory, but was renamed by the U.S. Navy the Queen, which I'm sure was a shot at Queen Victoria running blockades. It was converted into a Union Navy ship, supply ship, operating out of New Orleans. And from the enlistment record, we know that Joe had blue eyes, dark hair. He's about 5'7", and he had a big honking scar on his right index finger. And I'd like to think that's from working with Granite. Lived most of that time at 37 Grove Ave in Westerly. So Bedford worked for the Smith Granite Company for 24 years, according to his obituary. This is the first statue that we know that he cut for Smith in 1881, and it's the Wilcox Monument in New Haven. This is a present day view of that monument. And this is the last one that he cut in 1897. This is for Henry G. Hungerford in Jamesville, New York. And there's the modern day view of it. So it looks like Joe's forte was carving sculptures of women, right? However, he's listed as like the co-stone cutter on the American Volunteer Monument at Antietam. So I'm wondering if Joe is in one of these photos. I would love to ID these people. And this is from a great series. If you go to Wikipedia, they have a link to the New York Public Library with big TIFF files so you can zoom way in on these. They're awesome. All right, so up next, we've got one of my favorite monuments at Gettysburg, 78th, 102nd, New York. Here's a copy of the order book page. By the way, these guys are part of Greene's Brigade. So these are the guys that actually held the hill on July 2nd, okay? That's gonna come up in a minute. So here is the monument around the turn of the century. This is a great Tipton photo from 1897. And I love these photos because, you know, if you zoom way in, here's a horse-drawn carriage kind of making its way up. And this is the original route of Slocum Ave going to the east of Culvers Hill. In 1896, the statue was damaged, but, you know, we have it in 1897, and it doesn't look like it was too badly damaged. But it has seen, you know, some vandalism and other damage over the years. So you can see here he's missing his right hand and most of the rifle. Here's a modern view. Not too many people see that view of that monument, I'll tell you that. And you can see the lines like in his wrist where they replaced all those stones. And I think last year they did some more work on this. So I don't know, you see the different color of his hat brim? I think that's all new. And they were supposed to fix the hammer on the barrel, but looks like that hasn't been done yet. So this is the vets gathered at the monument. This is probably 1900 based on how old these guys are. See the dude on the bottom is shooting a rifle with the camera here. Modern view of the monument. All right, now my good friend in Gettysburg, Jeff Harding, who's an author, historian, he's a licensed battlefield guide, he's actually written an article about this monument that's coming out in Gettysburg Magazine in January. So be on the lookout for that. And I'm sure he's going to discuss, among many things, what appears to be a lion carved into the earthworks here on the statue. Here's another view, and you can really see that popping out here. So our question is, you know, this is really a Gettysburg mystery. Was that lion intentional? Was it created by Robert Barr? Was it created by Joe Bedford? Really we have no documentation on that, but he's done an extraordinary amount of research on the monument and the units themselves. So be on the lookout for that. This is a gorgeous monument, and part of the reason is because it's got two regiments, right? We combined the 78th and the 102nd. They were merged towards the end of the war because the unit size had shrank for, a myriad of reasons. But so, as a result, this is a $3,000 monument. All right. It's gorgeous. And I don't know what 3,000 is in, 1888 money, but it's a lot. Robert Barr is the sculptor, as I said. And from what I can gather, he's born in Scotland in 1857, dies in Westerly in 1900, grew up in New York City, and he's in Westerly by 1885. It looks like stone cutting was in the blood. His dad, Andrew, was a stonemason, and his brother, Frank, is on the New York census as a stonecutter. He lived at 79 Elm Street in Westerly, which is, I think, is the Elm and Beach. And then Barr had a little bit of romance going on at the Smith Granite Company. He married Bertha Richmond at the Lorenzo Richmond residence in Pawcatuck in 1887. Now, Lorenzo Richmond was the stonecutter at the Smith Granite Company. So we can kind of figure out how that came to be. So that brings me to one of my favorite topics, and Linda's going to kill me for talking about this again. But so the 149th New York Regiment, also called the 4th Onondaga because it is the 4th Regiment raised in Onondaga County, New York. This is part of Greene's Brigade, so these are the guys that held onto the hill July 2nd. This is the original monument to the 149th, which is erected in 1888, but it's never dedicated because the veterans were so unhappy with what they got that they had it torn down and replaced in 1892 by an entirely different company, Francis & Co. of Syracuse, New York. The Monument Commission, the chairman of the Monument Commission, George Knapp Collins, was a first lieutenant at Gettysburg in the 149th, New York. He said the monument was smaller than specified and not comparable to other monuments in the vicinity made for the same money. And it turns out he was right. When I gave this talk 2 years ago and I showed these two pictures, a lot of the audience members, it took them half a heartbeat to figure out what was wrong. Anybody see the difference? This is the order book, and this is what they actually got. That's right. That took me a month to see that. I don't know how you guys see that so fast. So as a result, it's about 1 foot 9 inches shorter of what it was supposed to be. Now, I wish we had a professional monument setter for the Smith Granite Company that maybe would have noticed we were missing a piece of the monument. Oh, that's right. James Roche, the professional monument setter, who is conspicuously absent from the Gettysburg Press in 1888 when this monument was erected. So I don't know that he wasn't there. We had an awful lot of granite go down there in 1888. So, we would want the #1 guy to be doing it, but he doesn't show up in the press like he does in 86, 87, 89, 90, 92. So, there's a mystery for you. We do know we have 3 guys that are sent down from Westerly to set up monuments. We have John Brines, Edward Kelleher, and Joseph E. Thompson. Now, licensed battlefield guide Tim Smith was nice enough to, in the Gettysburg Daily website, he went down and he traced with chalk the carving that Joe Thompson made in the rock that's right next to the 149th monument in Gettysburg. So it looks to me like Thompson was in charge of where we're going to place the monument, and he carved his name to show where it was supposed to be set up. And I said it 2 years ago, but it bears repeating. Joe Thompson didn't put a sign up, right? He didn't put a flag up. He carved his name into the rock to show you where to put the monument. How Westerly, Rhode Island is that, right? So in the 2 years since I gave that talk on the 149th, I discovered this extra bit of, a piece of the puzzle, right? In 1887, I want to say, this newsletter was circulated among the veterans of Greene's Brigade, and it was a list of all the members of the brigade, and it if you got the newsletter in the mail, you were supposed to update contact information for all these guys and bring it to Gettysburg, bring it to the reunion, so we'd have an updated list of where everybody was, kind of a thing. So this one belonged to a guy named George Sager, who was in the 149th New York, and presumably brought it with him to Gettysburg like he was supposed to for the monument dedication in 1888. And it sure looks to me like his two sketches on the back here, the top one sure looks like this is what we got, right? It looks like he drew, this is what we got. And then the one on the bottom is maybe this is what we were supposed to get, which would mean that we've got a whole piece in the middle of the monument that isn't there. Now, who was responsible for that? We don't know. I know that the New York Monuments Commission made changes to the monuments, the designs of monuments before they got to the Smith Granite Company in certain instances, but we don't know for sure. We don't even know for sure that that's what that says, but you know, it's definitely another piece of the puzzle. Yeah, that's the original. So also 2 years ago, when I gave this talk, I was talking about the argument is the veterans of the 149th were so upset because the monument was so short and, you know, just didn't size up to the other monuments in its vicinity, right? And it was shorter than it was supposed to be by about 1'9". So, you know, to its immediate left is the monument to the 78th 102nd New York. All right, this is one of the most beautiful monuments at Gettysburg, costs twice as much as the 149th monument, and is really not a fair comparison. But the monument to its immediate right is the one to the 122nd New York, this behemoth looming over the 149th. Now, if you remember, the 122nd New York is the 3rd Onondaga Regiment. The 149th is the 4th Onondaga Regiment. So, you know, these units were very close, and this would be kind of a, you know, a big embarrassment to have their monument be so much bigger than theirs. To the average visitor visiting Culvers Hill, you see this giant monument, you think, wow, these guys had a big part in the defense of Culvers Hill, right? But the opposite is true. The 149th fought in the trenches all night on the 2nd, all day on the 3rd, and Shaler's Brigade shows up kind of at the 11th hour of the battle. So also, a couple of years ago when I gave this talk, I thought this monument was only 11'3", which makes it 3 feet 2 inches taller than the original 149th monument. But it's not 11'3". It's 12 feet 9, right? Which makes it almost 5 feet taller than the original 149th monument. That's my wife. That's like, you put my wife on top, and then you get the size of the monument. All right. Now, how do we know that? Well, because Maggie and I went down and measured the thing. All right. I'm gorgeous. So here is the replacement from 1892, and the 122nd New York is right there. Like I said, that one, the replacement was made by Francis and Company of Syracuse, New York. And the original 1888 monument has vanished, and we don't know what happened to it. Kinda. We're going to do a follow-up on that, I think, in a couple of years. So we're getting close. We're getting close. Somebody asked a question 2 years ago about were there any other monuments dedicated in 1888 that had issues, that had problems, right? And the answer to that question is yes. The 140th New York, which is on Little Round Top, they had a problem with the die stone, and that was replaced, I think, later that year. The interesting thing about that is that here's the 149th New York, right? The 140th is on the same order book page. So I don't know exactly what that means, but the only two we know had an issue were on the same page of the order book. That's interesting. I don't like coincidences. So that leads us to my last subject for today. This is George Sears Greene. Greene, as I said, is a brigade commander of Geary's division of the 12th Corps. Modern scholars of the battle seem to agree that Greene and his men demonstrated uncommon valor on July 2nd, 1863, hanging on to Culvers Hill, all right, in the face of overwhelming odds against an enemy in the darkness which seemed to be surrounding them they hung on to the hill. Modern scholars also agree that the breastworks created by Greene and his men saved the right flank of the Army of the Potomac that night. But Greene and his men were not even mentioned in the commanding general's official report. They did not get mentioned at all, and it took the Corps commander Slocum to say, "Hey, wait a minute, you left these guys out, and they need credit." Shortly after Gettysburg on October 19th, 1863, Greene is severely wounded in the face, leading his New York Brigade at the Battle of Wauhatchie Junction, Tennessee, which is a surprise Confederate attack against the railroad junction. He would suffer from this wound for the rest of his life. The pension file says it took some teeth and part of his jaw away with the bullet, and he had trouble chewing food for the rest of his life. In 1865, after partially recovering from his wound, he joined General Slocum's staff, and in March, he's given command of a brigade again and would march with them in the Grand Review in Washington, D.C. Throughout the war, Greene proves that he's a frontline general leading from the front. He has 2 horses shot out from under him, and he's wounded twice. Once at Wauhatchie, like I mentioned, and he's also wounded at Culvers Hill. He has a chest contusion from a spent ball that's also in the pension file. After the war, he returned to life as a civil engineer. During the 1870s, he oversaw lots of engineering projects in New York and D.C. and Detroit, and he even, I believe, designed the sewage system of Providence, Rhode Island. In 1871, he became the chief engineer and commissioner of the Croton Aqueduct Department of New York City, designing their aqueduct system, and the chief engineer of public works in D.C. In 1877, he's elected president of the American Society of Civil Engineers, which is an organization he helped found in 1852. He then became the president of the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society in 1876 and 77. Greene was an avid genealogist for his entire life, and his research is published posthumously in the volume The Greenes of Rhode Island, which is how we can say that Greene was third cousins twice removed from Nathaniel Greene. It's actually from his research that we've been able to figure that out. In 1893, seen here, he attended the 60th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. He's 93 years old. And he's the Grand Marshal of the parade for New York Day, which was July 2nd, 1893. He still fits into his Civil War uniform, all right, 60 years later. And I think he's so skinny because he can't chew, right? He can't chew the food. So in 1894, by an act of Congress, Greene is added to the retired list and awarded, I think it's a lieutenant's pension from the Army. Greene passed away at the tender age of 97 years old at his daughter Anna's house in Morristown, New Jersey. And he's laid to rest in the Greene plot, or the Greene Cemetery in Apponaug, Rhode Island. In his will, he made sure that the kids were going to publish the genealogical research, and he also divided his library among his children and left a bunch of his papers to the Rhode Island Historical Society. So this guy, I definitely get that, because, I get a lot of books and I want to make sure people appreciate it. I want to go into the right hands. In July 1899, a boulder was brought from Culvers Hill to serve as Greene's headstone. His son, now Brigadier General Francis Vinton Greene, petitioned the War Department to remove this boulder from Culvers Hill in Gettysburg. It arrived by rail in July 20th, 1899, and shortly thereafter, a bronze memorial plaque was placed on the front of the boulder, and a bronze cast sword was placed on top, mounted on top. Both of these items were stolen in the 1950s and recovered and are now housed at Warwick City Hall. The grave itself was rededicated in 2001, complete with this granite replica of the bronze panel that was originally affixed to the front of the boulder. It was made by the Guillot Monument Company of Warwick. Now, this is the sword housed in Warwick City Hall that was affixed to the top of the boulder at one point. Not too long ago, maybe the late 80s, a legend sprang up, a local legend sprang up, that this was Greene's actual sword that they mounted to the top of this boulder. We'll talk a little bit about the mysteries of Greene's grave. The Warwick Beacon last year called this Greene's battle saber. So they were definitely confused on whether or not this was an actual sword. It is not an actual sword. It is a cast made of an actual sword. We were able to determine that. This pattern was made by Tiffany and Company of New York during the war. But the jury is way out on whether Greene owned a sword of this pattern or if he actually carried it during battle, right? We've got a bunch of qualifiers, Greene's battle sword, to make that accurate. So we're still trying to figure out if he owned a sword in this pattern, but, eventually we'll figure it out, I think. This is a view of the Greene Cemetery in Apponaug about 1900. We don't have the bronze panel on the front yet. So this makes me think this is just after it was actually placed in the ground. Speaking of legends, sometime in the 90s or so, a legend sprang up that this specific boulder was chosen from Culvers Hill because Greene stood on top of it to direct troops at the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, I'm not even going to talk about the wisdom of a brigadier general standing on top of a boulder to direct troops in a night battle. We're not even going to talk about that, especially after you spend most of the day on July 2nd building breastworks so you're not exposed to fire. As it turns out, sifting through the official record, there's only one guy that actually reported encountering Greene on the night of July 2nd and during the day of July 3rd. And that's Colonel Rufus Dawes of the 6th Wisconsin. He says Greene directed him into line. And Dawes says that Greene was on a horse. So, maybe Dawes was confused, but I just can't believe that he was up on a rock. I think the legend sprang from this monument dedicated in 1907 that shows Greene in the very act of directing Dawes where to send his troops to reinforce Greene's line. And, there are boulders all over Culvers Hill, and it doesn't, take too much of a stretch of imagination to put him on a boulder instead of a pedestal. So, maybe he didn't stand on a rock during the battle, but we know for a fact that the rock that's in Apponaug came from Culvers Hill. We have receipts, we have the record from Western Maryland Railroad. There's a bunch of evidence, newspaper articles. So the question remains, where exactly did this rock come from on Culvers Hill? There are suspects in Gettysburg. I showed this before, this is a Forbes painting of the Confederates and what they saw on the morning of July 3rd. This rock right here is a very famous rock in Gettysburg, and it's now called the Forbes Rock because of this painting, right? Edwin Forbes is the painter. And it was used by rebel marksmen on July 3rd. So the rock right next to it, this one, isn't there anymore, has ceased to exist. This is a photo, Matthew Brady photo. He loves sitting on rocks. That's Matthew Brady again. And this is Forbes Rock right behind him. It's this rock right here that is no longer there. And the theory is that it was removed to go to Apponaug and be on Greene's grave. Another interesting thing in this photo, you see all the black marks on the tree? This was taken a couple of days after the battle. Those are bullet holes in the trees. And actually, this picture is called Scarred Trees on Culvers Hill or something along those lines. So there's the rock right there. The one thing we do know about the rock is to put a bronze panel on the face of the rock. You have to have a flat surface to be able to mount it, right? So it was split at some point. And this rock has what looks like pretty straight lines running through it. So they might have just split it in Gettysburg and sent it up to Apponaug. But that's still a mystery. In recent years, Greene is starting to get some of the recognition he so justly deserves, and the city of Warwick has just completed a project, $250,000 project to renovate the Greene Cemetery in Apponaug. So before, this place was pretty much a mess, trash everywhere and broken headstones, and was not very well marked. And the first time I went up there, it's right next to the Fraternal Order of Police office, which was right up there. The first time I went up there, I couldn't find it, and I kind of wandered into the FOP and said, "Can you direct me to it?" now everything's going to be well marked. We're going to have a parking lot down here, and we've got a winding granite staircase going up to Greene's grave. So it's really cool, that they're starting to pay attention to Greene. Last time I was up there, it was under construction, and these are the stone stairs from the parking lot going up. I wish I had better photos of this to show you, but I couldn't get up there in time. So that's all I got for you today. So thank you very much for being here and listening to my complete geekiness and blather on about this. One thing before you go, if anybody has any information on George Sears Greene, Barr, Bedford, Roche, Van Amringe, please reach out to me and let me know about it. We'd love to, certainly ID Barr, Bedford, and Roche and learn as much as we can about everybody else. So thank you so much, guys. So I'll take questions if anybody's got some. Yes, sir.
Just out of curiosity, is there any history of a monument that was rejected being repurposed for another smaller monument? So in other words, the one that was taken down, if we can't find it, is it perhaps somebody's gravestone somewhere?
Yeah, we're pretty sure
it's lost forever.
Pretty sure that's exactly what happened to it. So the end result of that, that was in 1888 that it was rejected. We have traced that monument to 1898, and there was this correspondence battle between, believe it or not, Van Amringe, James Roche, and John Page Nicholson of the Park Commission, going back and forth about, where's the monument, pay for the monument, who's going to buy it, where did they leave it? And at the end of the whole conversation, Van Amringe said, you know what, you guys can have it. And so it wound up with John Page Nicholson and the Gettysburg Park Commission. So, Nicholson probably used it for something else. But I'll tell you, there is a suspicious chunk of granite out in the woods over there that looks very Westerlian, let's say that. So, it's unfortunately on private property. So until we can get over there and flip it over, that's where the story ends, unfortunately.
Were those bronze pieces affixed to it?
Yeah.
The pack and the thing?
Yeah, the bronze was sent back to Bureau Brothers in Philadelphia in 1888. And I thought for sure we found them on another monument. Jeff in Gettysburg sent me a picture of another monument and said, look at this. And I thought for sure we had it, but they're different pieces. It's the same setup. It's a knapsack, and a cartridge pouch and a canteen. And this monument has all three of those on the monument. Same size, same setup and everything. And it's not the same, unfortunately. But so I know Bureau Brothers is now an auto mechanic shop. The building is still there. And I called them and said, hey, I'm looking for this stuff. And they had no idea. They told me go away. So, but
That doesn't seem to stop you.
nah, I think that might make it worse. So, yes, sir.
Speaking of that, you should give yourself more credit for the Greene Cemetery in Mackinac for that being developed. Because then you drag the city of Wold and the Wold Historical Commission kicking and screaming.
I helped.
Do something about it.
I helped make the interpretive panels more accurate than they otherwise would have been. Let's say that. How's that? So, yep. Yeah. So, but there. So the project itself is all done. All this stuff, the layout, the parking lot, the stairs, all that stuff is done. We're just waiting on the interpretive panels. So, but I can't wait to get back up there because what a change, So.
And wait until that's publicized down in Gettysburg. You're going to get all these Gettysburg.
I know. Good.
Oh.
Yep. Very cool. So, all right. Thanks so much, guys.